Several years ago, a young man from Indiana said he was going to run for president, and he announced his candidacy. He became immediately someone that caught the imagination of many young people around the country. He called me, and I invited him to come to our convention as a candidate. And he said to me, "Where's that place up in Harlem that you brought Barack Obama to eat?" I said, "Sylvia's." He said, "I'd like to go there." And we met. I took him to Sylvia's. A lot of press was there. And I never forgot, at the end of eating, he got up and says, "I'm going to walk around and talk to people." I said, "I don't know if you need to do that." He said, "No, it's all right." And he went to every table in Sylvia's and introduced himself. And I never forgot that. He didn't know, because I've never, Barack, everybody, Caroline, nobody did that but this man. He has stayed in touch. He has stayed one for outreach. He has been one that I think has proven to be a public servant. He is now the Secretary of Transportation for the United States of America, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Now, Secretary Pete said that he does not have to make a speech. We're going to have a conversation. I'm going to ask him questions. Show you how much courage he got. He come to my convention, let me ask what I want. Let me ask you first and foremost, there's been a lot of train derailments. That has been a lot of concern to many of our delegates from around the country. What is the Department of Transportation doing about the train derailments? And what about these companies that have not spent the money that would really make train travel safely?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for your leadership, and thanks to everybody in the National Action Network for the work that you do. It's a real honor to be with you. As it was an honor to be with you at Sylvia's and here at the convention 4 years ago. And thank you for that question, because it is an incredibly important part of what we're working on transportation safety. The short answer is it takes accountability and enforcement for these railroad companies that make billions of dollars in profits running goods and materials, some of them hazardous, through communities around the United States. And I think, especially after what happened to the community of East Palestine, Ohio, people who live near railroads, and that's a lot of Americans, are saying, am I safe? Is my home safe? Is my neighborhood safe? Is my community safe? And in order for them to know that they can rest easy, there has to be tougher standards on railroads. What happened in Ohio woke Americans up to the fact that these train derailments happen much more than people realize. They literally happen every single day in America.
Wow.
Now, thank God, most of them do not have those kinds of hazardous material releases, but some of them do. And in the past, there has been action about that. About 10 years ago, there was a derailment in Quebec that killed 48 people because the train exploded. And it led to reforms. But then what happened in Washington, what happens often in Washington, is those reforms come in, and then they start to get watered down bit by bit by bit, because there was a lot of power in the freight railroad industry. So we're doing two sets of things right now. First of all, we as a department are working to hold railroad companies accountable. That means bringing back the safety audits that the last administration put the brakes on, because we need to audit these companies to see how their safety is performing.
Wait a minute. When you say the last administration took the brakes off, you know you can't bring up Trump without me saying, what did they do? I'm not taking a shot at Trump. I'm just asking specifically what might have been.
Let's just say that the last administration was not enthusiastic about enforcement and regulation when it came to the freight railroad industry. We are. This has to happen. And that's why we're using all of the authority we have under the law. But there could be more. Right now, there is bipartisan action in the Senate to try to raise the standards. I'll give you just a couple examples. The maximum amount by law that we can fine a freight railroad for, even if they get caught with a major violation that leads to fatalities, is about $250,000. Now, if you are a multi-billion-dollar railroad company, that is not enough to get your attention. It could be viewed as just the cost of doing business. And that cap is set by law. So one of the things that's being proposed is to change that, to make it a good enough chunk of their profits that they would have to pay attention to. Requiring railroads to notify communities when hazardous materials are coming through those communities so they're ready to respond if something does happen. Now, there are some senators who are saying, we should really wait another year or so, get the report back from Ohio, then maybe we could do something. I would say anybody who was quick to get on television to talk about this issue when it was a political hot button now has an opportunity to put up or shut up. And I'm hoping that everybody will do the right thing and support this kind of bipartisan action so we can hold these railroad companies accountable. That's the short answer.
There has been a lot of reports about disparities in traffic accidents. And it was stunning to me when I looked at the data how blacks and browns are the victims of traffic accidents.
That's right.
More than whites in this country.
That's right.
Explain to me what the Department of Transportation's focus is on that.
There is a crisis in our country when it comes to roadway deaths. Just think about this. I bet every one of us could think of several people we know and we care about who lost their lives in a car crash. Every single one of us. Lots of people. It happens so much that it does not get talked about, but the number of people we lose to roadway deaths in America is about 40,000 a year. It's about the same as the number of people we lose to gun violence. So since we are rightly focused on ending the epidemic of gun violence in this country, and by the way, I have a lot of admiration for people like those in Tennessee who are working to show the courage that is needed in order to make that happen. We are equally focused, especially in the Department of Transportation, on making sure that we tackle roadway fatalities. Now, as you mentioned, these are not distributed equally. Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, tribal citizens are more likely to lose their lives both in a car and as a pedestrian. Now, why would that happen? Well, one reason why that would happen is if you live in a neighborhood that was left out of past rounds of investment and you don't have very good streetlights in your neighborhood that make it safer. Maybe you're in a neighborhood where you've got to walk half a mile just to get to a crosswalk, and so people aren't able to cross safely closer to where they are. This is not theoretical. Maybe you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have very good transit options, and so you're more likely to have to walk even if there's no sidewalk. We can do something about that, and we are. We are funding improvements across the country right now, everywhere from Roosevelt Boulevard in Philadelphia. I don't know if anyone from Philadelphia knows how dangerous that has been for pedestrians and drivers, to improvements in Charlotte, Detroit, around the country, small communities too. And we are making sure the focus is on where it's really needed, which is, again, too often, if you just look at the numbers, black and brown neighborhoods. So we have a chance right now, and we're using it, thanks to the funding that was in President Biden's infrastructure law, to put those dollars to work and bring them to the places that were left out in the past.
There has been a lot of hate crimes, increased hate crimes over the last couple of years. And the outright lack of subtlety in terms of those that want to disparage or do things that are both physical and just verbally against blacks, against women, against Asians, Jews, Latinos, and LGBTQ. And you've gotten your share of a lot of the hate because you've, from the beginning, been openly LGBTQ. How have you been able to navigate that personally, and what is being done to deal with these hate crimes on a federal level as you are one of the key members of the administration?
This is a moment where we as a country have to turn back the tide of hate. And we see that tide rising. We see it in everything from online to physical attacks. And often those who are attacked are already part of a vulnerable community. And we also know that there is political advantage in some places for some political figures to try to target those vulnerable communities because they think they can get some benefit out of it. So we're going to decide if we are serious as a country about lifting everybody up or not. Tennessee, gun violence taking lives every day. We're in Tennessee. Last time I was in Tennessee, it was to promote action and to deliver funding on infrastructure, including improving the airport in Nashville. And that same day, you know what they were focused on, the legislature? Drag queens. They were more worried about drag queens than gun violence.
Wow.
At a time when we see the pain of the loss and the fear that so many Americans are experiencing because they're being targeted racially, because they're members of the LGBTQ community being targeted. No one asked for this kind of legislation to go after people to make life even harder for people who already have a pretty hard go of it. So we just have to decide if we're serious. Now, in this administration, from the president on down, the message has been clear. The president, the vice president, all of us are committed to stamping out hate and violence anywhere we find it, including, importantly, our transit networks, because you have to be safe when you're getting on the bus, safe when you're getting on the subway, safe on your way to work, and know that you will be safe coming and going.
And that's what I was going to ask you. How do you enforce that with your transit workers, those under the direct employment that you can impact as Secretary of Education, Secretary of Transportation?
Well, think about how much we've counted on our transit workers. Transit workers who become part of the daily routines, almost part of the families of so many people as they're on their way to school. And they cannot come to work on Zoom. They were there in the darkest days of the pandemic. And they deserve to be respected, and they deserve to be safe and free from violence. So what are we doing about it? It's everything from funding the kinds of equipment that they ought to be able to work with, including equipment that's well designed so that there's less of a risk to the driver. And it means sending a strong message to everybody that we expect that transit operators to be treated with respect. And that's something that everybody can help us drive.
And many of our transit workers, and as you could see, they're members of the audience that have work in that area, they worked through the pandemic.
Exactly.
When everyone else was home, they still came out.
That's right.
And worked. I was amazed that I would come out and they still would run the trains in New York and in Chicago and other places. And people never gave them credit for the health risks that they took. And I think that ought to be underscored.
Mm-hmm. That's right. They are the definition of essential workers because they helped other essential workers, like the nurses, get to where they needed to be.
And you talk about first responders. The first responders who we applaud, because certainly we couldn't have made it through without them. But the first responders could not have, in New York, they couldn't have responded if the trains wasn't working.
That's right.
Lastly, let me ask you this. If there was something that you felt was the most important thing that civil rights organizations like National Action Network ought to focus on, and it was interesting you said when you went to Tennessee how they would not deal with guns safety. They were talking about drag queens. so that we're not majoring in minors and minoring in majors in your judgment. What is the kinds of things you think national civil rights organizations ought to be focused on?
Well, I think that the National Action Network, because of your grassroots presence, can play an extremely important role in the future of the infrastructure that we're building. Remember, we're investing in America like never before. I mean, we're about to move $1.2 trillion through the economy. We're doing it right now. Everything from getting lead pipes out so that people can drink clean, safe drinking water, to making sure that 100-year-old tunnels like the Hudson River tunnels here in New York finally get fixed. As we're doing that, as we're doing all of our work, and I would describe our work as a department as really falling in two categories. One, to build that good infrastructure, to build good things well. And two, to protect everyone who comes into contact with our transportation system. Whether we're talking about a bus driver, the transit operators, or whether we are talking about a resident of a community close to a train line, or whether we are talking about a homeowner in the path of a proposed highway expansion. And we know how that has affected black communities over the years. Now is the moment where all of that work we're doing as a department is going to depend on the voices of communities. It's very important that your members hear and know that the decisions both about what gets built and where the road is going to go, which bridge gets fixed first, where the transit line gets extended, and the decisions about who gets to do that work, including black-owned businesses, including those good-paying construction jobs and those hard hats. The money may be coming from our building in Washington, but the truth is the biggest decisions are being made closer to home. They're being made at the transit agencies. They're being made in the city councils. They're being made in the state houses. And so the single biggest thing that I have to say to answer your question is make your voice heard as your state, your city, your community, your county is deciding what to do with all this funding. We're going to work to steer it in the right direction according to the bipartisan infrastructure law. But ultimately, so many of those decisions, again, both about the wealth creation opportunity of getting in on that work and about what is going to get built and who is going to have to wait, those decisions are being made where grassroots involvement of the kind that the National Action Network has done so effectively will make a huge, huge difference. And please make sure that your voice is heard.
Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Give him a hand.